last one. Madam, in terms of witnesses, you will have seen a very large number of mostly pretty short witness statements and statutory declarations. There have been some conversations with Mr. Grant just before we started, and I don't think we're going to do it now, but at some stage, perhaps after my first witness will be Michael Singer, we'll take a little pause and see where we've got to and see how many of the statements of my other witnesses are actually being challenged by the council, and then we can perhaps take it from there. So potentially I have a very large number of witnesses to call. I'm not going to list all their names now, you've got their statements, but with a bit of luck we will work out an accommodation which will lessen the number.
Thank you. And can you tell me who I can ask questions of in respect of the documents that were filed at the time of the application?
You can ask questions of Mr. Pick, and you can ask questions of Mr. Singer.
Yes, because Mr. Pick has no personal knowledge of those events, some of them, does he? So it'd be Mr. Singer.
Yes. If your question was about the documents from a planning perspective, Mr. Pick, if your question is about the events of the
mostly factual.
Years, mostly factual. Let's start, please, with Mr. Singer, and if there's anything that he's unable to answer, then there will be other witnesses that I will have to call and happily will call.
Thank you very much. And for the council, please.
Madam, good morning. My name is Edward Grant of Council, representing the London Borough of Enfield and instructed by the solicitor to the London Borough of Enfield. I propose in due course to call two witnesses, both of whose proofs and appendices you have. They are Sean Newton and Wesley Pemberton. Madam, just to take a little further what the learned friend has helpfully set out for you in terms of progress and witnesses, the vast majority of matters that I intend to put as some factual history, I would anticipate being able to put to Mr. Singer, who I think is going to be the first witness called on behalf of the appellant. As to the large number of shorter statutory declarations, they principally deal with the number of people who were attending services in the early days. And that's the issue where the learned friend accurately puts it, that we said we would take stock, really, once we have finished Mr. Singer's evidence, which I would have thought his evidence is likely to take us until lunchtime, close to lunchtime. The one thing, of course, that I won't be in a position to say, no matter what approach I take to the short witnesses, if I can describe them in that way, it is the approach that third parties might take to their evidence. So that even if there was something in their evidence that I wouldn't propose to challenge, of course that is something that the inquiry needs to be alive to, as to whether or not third parties would have issues. But as I say, I think, as Learned Friend helpfully suggests, if we take stock really at the end of Mr. Singh's evidence, that might be the best way of dealing with it.
Okay. Are there any interested persons who wish to be heard? Right. Yes, sir, you are.
Neil Haynes. I live number 27 Lancaster Avenue. I own a house directly in front of the what was the residential house now.
I have representations from you. We'll come on to timing in a minute, okay?
Sure.
Right, so I've got your name, Mr. Haynes, yes, and at the back of me.
I'm Fiona Stockwell, and I live at number 6 Lancaster Avenue, and I also submitted representations to the parties back.
Yes, I have those. Thank you. Anyone else? No. I believe we have an attendance list that is being circulated. The young lady who helped me said she had one.
I'm sorry.
She has prepared them, I know, because I specifically asked her. Right.
I have seen it doing the rounds. But it
Yes.
may not be-
Has anyone signed an attendance list yet?
Yes.
Yes. So it's around here somewhere. Hopefully.
On a black clipboard.
Anyway, I would be grateful if everybody would sign it. It is not an inquiry document for reasons relating to the Data Protection Act, but it may be that we might need to contact you as a result of what happens today or in the subsequent days, so if you would please sign it. Today's event is not part of any customer survey, so you don't have to worry about the box. If you don't want anybody to see your personal details, please sign a separate sheet and give it to me separately. And just to let you know that if you do speak at the inquiry, your name will appear on the list of appearances, but it will be as member of the community, local resident. There won't be any address or anything like that on the decision. Right, we dealt with Mr. Hope's filming. I've had a copy of the Council's letter of notification of the appeal being lodged, but I've not had a copy of that letter relating to today's inquiry. Was there a letter of notification sent out, please? That should be the one telling people that we're here.
Yes.
Thank you. Do you have a copy of that? No, can we help with the other side?
Let's see.
Thank you very much. In response to the original letter, I had three responses from local residents. I trust that those three have gone to both parties. Yes. Yes, good. There were various letters throughout the proceedings that have gone on before we got here today. Is anyone aware of any other letters that I haven't seen and that I should have? I've not visited the site because it's a different sort of application from one normally has, but I will be making an accompanied visit at some point, probably when we've finished here, where features relevant to the inquiry can be pointed out. As everybody knows, there's no discussion of the merits of the case at the site visit, and arrangements will be made about when it's to take place and who will be there at a later stage. Mr. Pick, on behalf of the appellants, advised in his grounds of appeal that he would be making an application for costs. I'm not sure whether he's pursuing that. I will ask again towards the end of the proceedings here as to whether that is the case, but as a preliminary indication, is there likely to be one?
Well, I think we'll see how we go.
See how we go, right. Grant, you're on notice. Will the council be making any application?
Not envisaged at this stage, no.
Obviously, towards the end, you may change your minds. For those of you unfamiliar with public inquiry procedure, I hear the appellant's case first, before that of the planning authority. The advocates for the appellant and the council may, if they wish, make brief opening statements outlining the nature of their case. I would not expect these to last longer than 5 or 10 minutes, not the 30 minutes as Mr. Pick seemed to suggest in his time estimate. I'll then hear the evidence. Because there are matters in dispute, I intend to take evidence after the witnesses have made an affirmation. And I will remind the witnesses that once an affirmation has been made, the witness is bound by the terms of the Perjury Act, which states that where a person lawfully sworn as a witness in judicial proceedings willfully makes a statement material in that proceedings which he knows to be false or does not believe to be true, he should be guilty of perjury. 7 years imprisonment is the maximum penalty for perjury in judicial proceedings, and the other potential sanction is that a decision may be overturned in the High Court if it is subsequently found to have been based upon false or misleading evidence that has been given at the inquiry. So I hear the witnesses on behalf of the appellant. The counsel may cross-examine. The examination is necessary, and then I may have some questions for that witness. It's not usual for the advocates of either party to ask any questions after I have. When the appellant's evidence has been given, the counsel's witnesses, similar procedure. If any interested persons are present who wish to ask questions of witnesses of the opposing side, they may do so, but I would hope that they are limited to questions relating to the points that they want to be made, and that haven't already been made by the advocates. I usually hear interested persons after all the evidence for both parties. Well, that's the usual procedure. But we are here for 3 days. You may not want to be here for the whole of that time. So if you could give me an indication of when you would like to give your evidence, that would be helpful. Today, Mr. Neal. Do you want to hear what Mr. Singer has to say and then give you your evidence after him? He should be finished by this afternoon.
That's fine, I'm here for the whole day.
The whole day, right, but perhaps after Mr. Singer, when you've heard...
Yeah, that's fine.
I don't, Miss Stockman.
I would like to be heard today or Thursday, but today my mum has asked me if I would time to be 3 o'clock. I don't know whether it would be feasible in time to be heard before then, if not to be for Thursday morning. That would be convenient.
Yes, well, perhaps in that case, if Miss Stockwell went before you, Mr. Hayes, today.
That's fine.
Would that be... So Mr. Singer, Miss Stockwell and Mr. Hayes.
Yeah.
Would that be... Would that suit you, Mr.
That's absolutely
Yes,
fine.
Mr. Brown?
Thank you.
Okay, right. We'll do it that way then. We are programmed to last for 3 days. We'll have an adjournment at lunchtime. It may be an hour, it may be slightly less depending on how much time people need and what perhaps discussions have taken place between the advocates as to how many witnesses we need to call. I'll have a short break mid-morning and mid-afternoon so we can stretch our legs and use the facilities. Depending again on the number of witnesses, we may start a little earlier tomorrow and perhaps sit a little later than the usual 5 o'clock. Would anyone be inconvenienced by that? No, right. I understand we have this room until 6. I wouldn't want to sit much later than that because it makes it a rather long day if we do, but...
I will fall in with whatever's
So-
coming into the inquiry.
and for your witnesses, of course, as well. I don't want them to have to stay too late. But that's the sort of thing that I think we will discuss as we go along. I have a statement of common ground. Thank you for that. I take it it's agreed. I've obviously read the proofs and the affirmations and the various documents that have been submitted. Those that have provided summaries, I'm happy for those to be read and for relevant points to be brought to my attention, clarification and amplification as we go along. It may not be necessary for everybody to read their affirmations, but again, each witness, I'm in the hands of the advocates. The main issues to be considered in this inquiry: the Section 195 appeal is concerned purely with the lawfulness of the existing use at the date on which the application was made. The date of the application is the 4th of March 2014. In such appeals, the planning merits of the use are not matters for me, and questioning is not allowed on those matters. I have to determine the appeal on the basis of what has been applied for, and the description of the application on the application is use of ground floor as community synagogue with ancillary accommodation on the first floor. The notice of refusal, the statement of common ground, and many other documents refer to ancillary living accommodation. I would be grateful if the applicants could assist me as to whether that is different and what actually we're talking about. Okay, thank you. There's also advice in the planning practice guidance that an application for a lawful development certificate has to describe precisely what is being applied for, not simply a use class. And in various documents that I have read, there seems that the use is being described as a synagogue and a religious meeting room. And so I will be asking for some evidence and some help from you in respect of, I hope I've put this in the right way, what is a synagogue? I ask that question because I have been involved in the past with various planning matters relating to the Orthodox Jewish community in Stamford Hill, in particular a school, where there was an assembly room where they had prayers, chanting, meetings, religious instruction. But that was not a synagogue. And so I need to know what makes the use of number 8 a synagogue, please. Because that is what is being applied for, not a general use class. And that, as you may know, a lawful development certificate cannot be given for use class D1. It has to specify use. So those are the sort of questions that have come to my mind when I've been reading the documents, and I would be grateful for some advice from witnesses and counsel on that, please. Another matter that has come to my mind in reading the paperwork is that Mr. Pemberton says in his statement that he was told certain things about the use of the premises in 2007. I wondered, and I want to know, or whether I would be grateful if Mr. Grant would let me know whether he will be making any submissions in respect of what Mr. Pemberton was told, following on from the Beasley and the Fiddler cases. Those are my preliminary thoughts on where we are. Are there any matters that anybody wishes to raise with me, of a procedural nature or otherwise? No. In that case, Mr. Tabachnik, would you like to open your case?
Madam, yes. I'll be brief, and I will try and keep within the 5 to 10 minute indication.
A little bit over, won't matter.
I think that from our perspective, the starting point for this inquiry, obviously subject to your points about precision on the application, obviously any variation that's required under 195, 3 or 4, whatever it is, which I'm sure can be dealt with in the course of the inquiry. Otherwise, the starting point for today's purposes is paragraph 9 of the Statement of Common Ground, which reflects the decision made by the authority in refusing the certificate application, whereby the authority's position stated as being that there has been a material change of use, but essentially they say that there isn't strong enough evidence, or wasn't strong enough evidence, that the change of use was at least 10 years before the application was made. So where we are is an agreed position that a material change has taken place, and the issue is when that change took place. And the issue really, therefore, is whether at the time the community moved into Lancaster Avenue in September 2002, or shortly thereafter, whether that is the time at which material change took place. Obviously that would be in advance of the March 2004 point at which you have to make the ultimate assessment. And we say when you look at the evidence as to what was going on at that particular juncture and in the early months and the early years of life at Lancaster Avenue for this community, that this is not a situation of a complete startup organisation. This was not a building bought and acquired on a whim with grand ambitions of following purchase, seeing if a community could be started up which could in due course fill the building. That isn't how matters began or progressed, and it isn't why the building was acquired. The building was acquired, madam, as you've seen from the evidence, because there already was a thriving community, a thriving satellite community that had grown out of the Cockfosters' much larger synagogue, and it was the existence of that thriving community which people decided had outgrown meeting on a weekly basis in other people's living rooms and moving their furniture around and all the rest of it, which caused people to band together and look to acquire a property for purposes of this community. And the evidence indicates that a property search was gone through. There's evidence that various residential properties were looked at and rejected because they were too small to accommodate the size of the community that was anticipated to meet when services took place. That's in particular Mr. Pack's statutory declaration. He said they needed a big living room because they were anticipating 30 to 40 people every time the weekly service took place. What that led to after this particular property was identified was, again, as you will have seen from the evidence, very substantial donations and loans from the then existing members of the community with a view to the property being acquired and put into a charity. And I'm going to ask you at the end of this case, madam, to ask yourself why it is people would do that. Would they do that because, in effect, they hope that they will be fueling a startup operation for which they have great aspirations, or would they do that because there already is an existing community which has simply outgrown whatever the earlier arrangements were? And I'm also going to ask you to put those sorts of features into the pot with the question as to tithe residential accommodation, and ask yourself, against the context of those sorts of arrangements and the obvious purpose and intention that one can derive from them, what is really going on with having a resident rabbi, which the evidence suggests began in about August of 2002, Rabbi Simon and his family moving in. And the answer is that, again, as the evidence establishes, all those who were resident within Lancaster Avenue were there in order to serve the wider interests of the community. They were there to lead the services, whether one talks about the weekly Saturday morning service, or the additional services held, could be weekday or weekend, for the minor festivals, probably another 10 or so, all the various other cultural activities that took place during the week. And again, when one focuses on that, it's clear that the rabbi is there because of the community and because of the synagogue use. If it weren't for the synagogue use, there wouldn't be a need for and there wouldn't be a resident rabbi. And so if one wants to ask what is wearing the trousers, what is driving matters at that particular time, the answer is that the primary purpose and function of the building at that time is as a synagogue, and everything else, and the way in which everything else was set up, followed from that. So that's your answer as to what was the primary use and what was the ancillary use at the time. And indeed, we would say, and will say, that there is no material change between that scenario, which was how the building opened its doors in effect under community ownership, and the present time. I accept that membership numbers have subsequently gone up, attendances in some cases have gone up, and there are certainly one or two additional cultural events and things of that nature which have been added into the mix over the years. That's undoubtedly the case, and it's a big point the council makes in their evidence. But what you need to focus on, Madam, is when the material change of use came about, the fact that there's been a degree of, as it were, greater intensity of use is by the by when one focuses on the question as to when material use began. And if I put into the pot as well for you the supporting statements that you've seen from a very large number of congregants and members of the community, then we say it's perfectly clear that the position that emerges is that in the early years there was indeed a recognisable and thriving community which existed and made use of this building as the building's primary function. The statements, broadly speaking, hover around 30 to 40 on a weekly basis figure, and no doubt we will see in due course what the council's position is about all of those statements and all of that evidence. Most of that evidence, if not all of it really, was before the council at the time it made its decision. The officer report started off saying that significant weight should be attached to those matters, and then said that they hadn't, we're not going to accept it as establishing the facts that it purports to corroborate. And you all have read the officer report and perhaps wondered, like we have, what the basis was for not accepting on its face that evidence. Well, the same question arises today. What is the council's position? Do they dispute the thrust of all of that evidence or not? And obviously that's a point which Mr. Grant and I will take stock on in due course. But we say that at the end of this case, frankly, the overwhelming supporting statements lead to only one conclusion that can fairly be drawn as to the level of activity going on in the early years of 2002, 3, 4 period of time. And on that basis, when you ask yourself whether that is sufficient to establish a material change of use, again, we say that the answer is absolutely clear. So, Madam, we will, during the evidence, I'll have more to say about things like the enforcement visits and what was and wasn't said during 2007, but I don't think that's appropriate for an opening submission. So unless there's anything else that I can help you with at this stage, those are my opening observations.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cummings.
Madam, I've got a brief opening in writing.
Thank you.
Lancaster Avenue has the appearance of a detached family dwelling house in a residential suburban street characterised by similar properties. In March 2014, an application was submitted by the HWJC Jewish Community Limited for a lawful development certificate for an existing use pursuant to Section 191 of the Act. The application described the use as use of ground floor as a community synagogue with ancillary accommodation on the first floor. The application was refused on the 6th of October 2014. An appeal was made, and the question for this inquiry is whether or not the refusal was well founded. The use for which the certificate is sought is not a use which benefits from planning permission, and as an enforcement notice had not been issued, the use did not represent a contravention of the notice. It was, however, a breach of planning control. And the question to arise pursuant to Section 191, subsection 2, is whether at the date of the application, the breach of planning control had become immune from enforcement action. The relevant period for these purposes being 10 years, the central question is whether the unauthorised use had continued on a substantially uninterrupted basis since March of 2004. It is well established that the burden of proof in establishing lawfulness rests squarely with the applicant or the appellant, the standard of proof being a balance of probabilities. Although the terms of the application appear to disconnect the ground floor from the first floor, it's clear from the written evidence that both of the principal parties view the site as a single planning unit, and it is the appellant's argument through Mr. Pick's proof of evidence that the whole property is in now lawful D1 use with an ancillary element of residential accommodation. The site was purchased by the appellant company in 2002. The company had been incorporated a few weeks before the purchase with the objective described in the Memorandum of Association as to further the religious and other charitable work of the Jewish community and congregation of Hadley Wood and surrounding areas, and to provide residential accommodation for a minister or rabbi, premises for the community synagogue or other place of worship, and amenity for the members. The mere fact that the company purchased 8 Lancaster Avenue does not mean that the primary use of the building automatically became a D1 use. One has to look instead at the actual use to which the building was put. The local planning authority do not seek to disagree that the appellant's description of the current use through Mr. Pitt accurately reflects the use both at the time of the application and today. However, it is the local planning authority's position that during the earlier part of the 10-year period, the primary use remained its lawful use as a residential dwelling, whilst the use for religious meetings or services was at that time the ancillary element. There would have been no material change of use until the primary use of the building had become a D1 use. An assessment of whether a use is primary or ancillary is one of fact and degree. It is said by the appellant that prior to 2002, a number of families would meet at the home of Mr. and Mrs. Pack on Saturday mornings for a Sabbath service, but nobody would suggest that the primary use of Mr. and Mrs. Pack's house was as a place of worship. There is no suggestion that at the time 8 Lancaster Avenue was purchased, its use was anything other than a residential dwelling house. The principal question of fact for this inquiry is whether by March 2004 the primary use of the building had already become a place of worship as a synagogue. There is no prescribed or closed list of matters relevant to the factual assessment, but the planning authorities submit that the relevant factors include the extent to which the property continued to be used as a family dwelling house, the frequency of services held, and the number of people attending those services. By 2014, although the building still appeared to be accommodating an assistant rabbi, the use as a synagogue had become so significant that in the appellant's view it had outgrown its premises. Following acceptance as an independent synagogue by the United Synagogue in 2012, the building next door, 8A, had been purchased as additional accommodation for an additional rabbi, whilst attendances and the number of regular services being held had multiplied, This growth explains why a planning application was submitted but subsequently withdrawn in 2013 for an enlargement of the appealed property. The comparison with the position in 2004 is stark: small-scale services, limited to Saturday mornings, without a full-time or even employed rabbi, albeit the rabbi and his family were living in the building. In the planning authority's submission, the refusal of the application was well-founded, and the evidence submitted through the appeal process fails to demonstrate that the breach of planning control had been continuing for 10 years. And those are my submissions by way of opening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clark. Right. Your first witness, Mr. Clark.
Yes, it's going to be Mr. Singer, madam, and I wonder if perhaps...
No, I thought if he sat
Oh,
here,
fine.
then he can use the microphone, so everybody can hear, and I can see, and everybody can see him. That's it, John. Everybody will hear. Okay. Right, before you sit down, Mr. Singer, I will ask if everybody would be quiet, please, while I administer the affirmation. Did you say after me, please? I do solemnly,
I do solemnly,
sincerely and truly
sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the
and
truth.
nothing but the truth.
Your full name,
Michael Jonathan Singer,
and your address.
Parkgate Avenue, Edinburgh Pass.
Very much. Please go. And anyway,
Thank you, ma'am. So, Mr. Singer, first of all, documents. I hope you've got to hand your statement from the 25th of April of this year and the 125 pages or so appendices to that. And have you also got Mr. Newton's evidence and all the appendices to that, please?
Not in front of me, I have it in.
Right, we'll go and get that, and make sure you've also got the appendices of Mr. Pick in case we need to turn any of those up, and the evidence presented at application stage. All right, and all the documents we need to talk about will be in all of those.
no, you speak to the front, and I'll
First question, Mr. Singer, can you tell the inspector, please, what you do and what your qualifications are when you're not doing this?
I run a computer software company providing software to hospitals. My qualifications are apart from a degree. I'm a chartered company director and fellow of the Institute of Directors.
And specifically your role within HWJC. Can you tell us what that is, please, now?
Currently, I sit on the board of HWJC. Until last year, I was chairman of the board for the last 5 years before.
And have you had a formal role as director of the charity?
Yes, I'm a director of the charity, director of the charitable trust as well.
And how long has that been the case?
Since the trust was founded in 2002, I believe. We may have, I'm not sure about the exact age of the paperwork. It may be that it didn't get signed until early 2003, but it was from the beginning.
And were you also involved in discussions about the acquisition of Lancaster Avenue?
Yes, I was.
And such communities existed beforehand? Were you involved in that?
Yes, I was, very much so. We did quite a bit of research on the community because we wanted to know what kind of membership we were likely to have.
Right. I won't do this with every witness, but since you're up first, can you turn to your April 2015 statement, please, and read through it, and I'll have some follow-up questions for you.
I'm Michael Singer of 8 Parkgate Avenue, Hadleywood, Hearts, EN40NR, to solemnly and sincerely declare as follows. I'm a paid-up member of the Hadleywood Jewish community and have been so since October 2002. I've regularly attended weekly services at 8 Lancaster Avenue, Hadleywood since 2003. Prior to this, I was a regular attendee of services at homes around Hadleywood since moving to the area in 1991. From 2003 until 2008, my sons were also regular attendees. I can confirm that from around 2000, services were usually attended by in excess of 30 members. I was a founder donor of the Hadleywood Jewish community. I provided these funds for the express purpose of providing a synagogue in Hadleywood and accommodation for a rabbi, as it became clear that the community had outgrown services in members' lounges and that a synagogue required certain items which were not conducive to a home. For example, an ark to hold the Sefer Torah, the Bible scrolls. The attached documents demonstrate how the community grew and became established, even before the acquisition of 8 Lancaster Avenue. Services for the High Holy Days, the New Year and the Day of Atonement were held at Hadleywood on a large scale by the hire of the marquee. See attached documents related to the hire of the marquee in 2000. I attach a newsletter of the Fosters and North Southgate Synagogue dated October 1995. It announces the commencement of monthly Shabbat Saturday morning services commencing on the 4th of November 1995 at 64 Camden Way. Other newsletter extracts attached advertise Hadleywood services on the 3rd of February 1996, 2nd of March 1996, 6th of April 1996, 6th of July 1996, and Oneg, which is a Shabbos meal, is announced for Friday the 11th of October 1996 in Hadleywood Primary School. 125 persons attended the event. A further 1996 newsletter refers to 200 people attending Hadleywood at the New Year and remarks that an alternative site needed to be found. 8 Lancaster Avenue is not used even now for the High Holy Days because of the large attendances. A further newsletter dated September 1996 is headlined Rosh Hashanah, the New Year in Hadleywood. This refers to Friday evening services having commenced some years before in Hadleywood, and a monthly Saturday morning service had started. The new Sabbath service at Hadleywood boosted the membership figures for Hadleywood and North Southgate Synagogue as described in newsletters dated the 21st of February 1997. Similar services are advertised in 1997 newsletters. A meeting took place with 30 people on the 14th of October 1997 to discuss the growth of the Hadleywood community. It was resolved that the time had come to have a Hadleywood synagogue as a satellite to the main synagogue in Cockfosters. The number of services was increased from 1 per month to 2 per month. A bar mitzvah was advertised to take place on the 28th of March 1997 98. Bar mitzvah should have said a coming of age of a young child. Rabbi Fine of the Cockfoster Synagogue officiated in Hadley Wood on Shabbos the 18th of July 1998. A Hanukkah party was advertised for the 13th of December 1998. Twice monthly services are advertised between December and March 1999. A Kiddush lunch followed the service on Sabbath, the 1st of July 2000. Celebrations related to the mitzvahs and Buffer's forthcoming weddings are recorded at Hadley Wood between 1998 and 2000, details attached. Hadley Wood Jewish Community began to publish its own newsletter from September 2004. The newsletter announces weekly Saturday services at 8 Lancaster Avenue and only high holiday services at other venues. A mother and toddler group was announced for the 6th of September 2004 at 8 Lancaster Avenue and was described as being held every Monday with about 25 mothers and toddlers. An annual Oneg Shabbat Sabbath meal is announced to take place on the 5th of April 2005 at 8 Lancaster Avenue with Rabbi Hillel Simon. I also attach an expense sheet in relation to Kiddush or refreshments served after services. This shows that, allowing for inflation, spend has been rising only slowly since our records began in May 2003, before which our processes were less formal. This indicates slowly rising attendances over this time. Whilst the above information prior to 2002 is not directly related to 8 Lancaster Avenue, it creates the general picture how the community emerged and how regular synagogue services were taking place after the property was acquired. I make this solemn...
You don't need to read the rest of it. It just affirms what you said today. Right. So if we just take up one or two of those points, the penultimate paragraph addressed what you described as expense sheets for the Kiddush refreshments served after services.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain, please, what Kiddush refreshments mean?
After a service, it's normal to have wine or sometimes whiskey and some small refreshments. Normally I describe them as crackers and dips and Danish and fruit.
As you say, you have referred to and attached some records. Let's just have a look at those. If you turn to your exhibits, please, at page 113. Some sort of cash book entry, but just tell us what this document is, please, and what total sums are involved here.
At the time, we were on a normal Sabbath, so if there wasn't a celebration or something special going on, 30 to 40 people.
And if there was a celebration going on?
Depending on the celebration, 50 to 70 people.
And the sorts of celebrations you've mentioned in your evidence, bar mitzvahs and wedding-related celebrations, are those what you're referring to?
Yes.
What should the inspector infer about the general age range of the community from the existence of those sorts of...
Well, a bar mitzvah takes place, for a girl it takes place at the age of 12, and for a boy at the age of 13. So I suppose it infers that there were youngish families very involved in the community, then as there still are now.
The council has a suggestion. It was told that the community was really just for the elderly and the very young.
that's not the case.
Now, we talked about the Saturday morning services. What other services were held at Lancaster Avenue during, again, this early period, please?
As you said, we were quite well established, so we were already holding some services, albeit in people's houses, and had already started some of the festivals. The larger festivals, where lots of people attended, we didn't have at the house because it was as I said in my statement, it seemed to be too many people. The smaller festivals, 50, 60, 70 people, we started having them from the very early days. So,
and you have to be precise, please. What do you mean by started having them from early days?
From, say, 2003, we would have been having services for some of the minor festivals at Lancaster.
Right. Now, you've put in a summary history, which is the first couple of pages. Attached to your proof. And on the second page, you have an entry in relation to minor festivals. The fifth one down. Do you see that?
Yes, yes.
And then over the page, on page 3, you've listed what those minor festivals are.
Indeed.
That you are referring to anyway.
Sorry, that's correct, yes. Yeah. Sorry. Those are the festivals we started celebrating pretty much day one.
And again, just to be absolutely clear now that we know precisely what we're talking about, these minor festivals in the early period of the Lancaster Avenue era, were you in attendance personally?
Yes.
And the levels of attendances that you recall at these services?
Well, those festivals tended to get more people because families came with their children, sometimes friends and relatives. It kind of fits in the 50 to 75 range.
Okay. And missing from this list are what are sometimes called the high holiday services, New Year and Day of Atonement.
Indeed.
Now, what's the position with those, please?
Well, from about 2000, we started getting quite large numbers attending those services. Not all the Jewish people are Orthodox, and some won't attend every summer, some will only attend certain festivals, and a lot would only attend the High Holy Days. So the attendances there shot up to 200, 250 people.
So where do those take place?
We would normally arrange for people to volunteer their homes, their gardens. We would arrange to put up a marquee, a large marquee in their gardens, and move the synagogue to the marquee. On some occasions, we use local public buildings, so the local school, St Martha's, have been very helpful on occasions, allowing us to use their premises for our marquee. The school in Hadleywood, the primary school, have also been very helpful on occasions where we've had big attendances.
Right. Now, again, we just need to be precise for the inspector's purposes. When you talk about attendances on those days in the general region of 200, are you talking about now, or are you talking about, say, the period 2000 for the few years after that?
From, I can't remember precise numbers, but from 2000 on, we were already significantly over 200.
And has that been the position year on year? Has it been ups and downs?
No, it's probably around 250 now. So it's around.
Are those services held at number 8?
No.
What though do you what do you say to the inspector about the underlying community which is indicated by those attendances?
Well, we believe the community has been of a substantial size, or that the number of Jewish people living in Hadley Wood has been of a substantial size since the early 90s. Before then, people had to travel quite long distances to go to a synagogue, which, as you know, the inspector may not, is quite difficult because on certain festivals they have to walk. When we first started looking at the size of the community, we looked at the local communities and asked them how many of their members lived in Hadley Wood. So, for example, Old Farm Avenue, Cockfosters North Southgate Synagogue, in the early 2000s had on their books, I think it was 95 member families who lived in Hadley Wood. We know from the early days when we went round and did something called a mezuzah count, which is basically Jewish homes have on their door a small scroll. Even the majority of non-Orthodox Jews will still put this small scroll on their door. So when we were kind of looking to gauge the number of families in the area, people went round and looked at the doors and counted the numbers of these mezuzahs. And I think even in the very early days, we were looking at around 200 to 250 houses that had these mezuzahs on them. So it didn't surprise us that we were getting those number of people attending to the High Holy Days.
Right. Very small additional question on marquees for the High Holiday services. Again, this is a question related to the 2002-3-4 period. This arises out of something Mr. Newton says, but can you help, please, as to who funded the marquee arrangement?
The marquees were actually funded by the United Synagogue because we were all part of the same bigger community. It's a national organisation responsible for the bulk of Orthodox Jewry in the UK.
So there's a suggestion by Mr. Newton that United Synagogue affiliation has only come very, very recently to the community. Do you accept that?
No, I wouldn't, because if not all, certainly the vast majority of members of the community were members of United Synagogue at the same time. In fact, in the early days, before we had 8 Lancaster, members paid 2 lots of fees. They paid one amount directly to the United Synagogue and a separate amount for their membership of the Hadley Wood Jewish community. So we were part of the United Synagogue even before we had our synagogue. In fact, our founding rabbi, who will be a witness later, who's here today, Rabbi Fine, was a rabbi employed by the United Synagogue.
Okay, good. Hopefully that will deal with that point. Now again, I want to stay with the early...
Excuse me, just make it... Have you had marquees in Orthodox?
We have, yes.
So when were they? And what were they for?
We had one recently, more recently, which was for a visit of the Chief Rabbi of the United Kingdom. And the reason was we had, if you're given a new scroll, a new copy of the Bible, which is kind of a big deal for a community. So we held quite a big service. It's actually an occasion where you take the new scroll and you can walk it around the area, kinds of celebrations, and then you finish off delivering it to the synagogue. And for an event like that, which is quite important, and the attendance of the Chief Rabbi, we put a marquee in the back garden so we could fit some extra chairs.
And when was that? I think it's somewhere in the papers, but...
Sorry,
sometime in 2008, I think, in the newspaper articles.
Yes.
And just since the inspectors asked you about that, and again, because there may be a misunderstanding on the council's part, does that event represent the first scroll in HWJC required?
No, you need a scroll from day one, and we weren't in a position to have our own. We initially borrowed scrolls from the United Synagogue. They have a supply which they lend organisations. And eventually we were given at least one scroll by a community that was closing down. And then we got to a point where there were members of the community often to celebrate the lives of family members of deceased who funded these scrolls being written specifically for our community.
Right, back to the early days and acquisition of the building, please. In the original application documents, there's a list at page 209. Can you turn that up, please? Now this says at the top, membership 2003, and then there's a list of people, and you can see by the column on the left-hand side, which ends at the bottom M61, that this is saying there are 61 members in the 2003 period.
61 families.
61 families. Now there's a column towards the right-hand side which says loan, and again, some people, there's an amount referred to as loan. And then there's another column, donation, and then there are various other amounts there. Do you see all that?
Yes, sir.
And then at the bottom, there's another list, sundry donations including non-members. Right, and we've got one more loan and a series of donations, and then some total figures.
Yes.
The total loan figure, the inspector will see what that is at the very bottom. And next to that, there is a total donation figure. The inspector can see what that is. And, obviously, added together, those come to a figure only a little bit short of £500,000.
That's correct.
What should the inspector infer, please, from the existence of these donations and loans at this time?
Well, we put them into the evidence to show, in effect, that we were a substantive community at the time. I don't think this number of people would have either joined as members or given or loaned this type of money just to provide accommodation for a rabbi. This was a very serious stage in the community. It was part of establishing a synagogue, and that was the only thing that would have generated that level of donations.
And the intention that you've just described behind these loans and donations, was that, in your judgment, carried to fruition?
Yes, it was. And I think the attendance has proved that.
Again, I think the evidence is clear on this, so I'll just mention this point to you to make it easy for me to ask my question. But in about August of 2002, the building purchase having been completed on the 31st of July 2002, Rabbi Simons and his family moves into the building.
Yes, that's correct.
Can you help the inspector, please, with what the relevant terms of his residents were, so far as the issues we're discussing here are concerned?
Yes, he was given a subsidised, very reduced rent for the property in return for his acting as the rabbi for our community, which meant he, along with lay members of the community, was involved in the prayers every Sabbath and offering certain advice and guidance to the community, providing certain educational events, we call them shears, which tended to be discussions of biblical topics.
If I just stop you there, where would those events be held?
At 8 Lancaster.
And can you assist the inspector with the frequency of those events again in the early years?
Well, the Sabbath services obviously were every week. The other services were more intermittent, so Friday night services, for example, we had from time to time in the early years. We did start, as we discussed earlier, the minor holidays from that first year, so there were some weekday services. The learning sessions tended to happen it's hard to remember the detail, but I seem to remember that it was evenings, weekday evenings rather than Saturday.
And how frequently are we talking? Monthly, more frequently, less frequently than that?
Yes, probably monthly.
Right.
They also, sorry, one other thing I should mention in that is they also sometimes arranged what we call an oneg, which is a dinner on the Friday evening before the Sabbath comes in. And those tend to be quite well attended. So I don't know if that would come on events.
And was that at 8 Lancaster?
That was at 8 Lancaster.
And the sort of number of attendances for either the occasional Friday night services that you referred to or the educational lessons that you referred to, were you at those?
I was at some of them, not all of them. The ones that were done as a celebration would get 50 plus people, but a regular service was a lot less, maybe 15 to 20.
And did Rabbi Simon have pastoral duties as well?
Yes.
And what was the community to which he would minister those pastoral responsibilities?
It was the membership of the HWJC community.
And would that be, as it were, duties that would be discharged as and when required during the week, or was it on some other more limited basis? How exactly?
How did what the regular events were obviously the services, but other events, for example, if someone died in the community, there are prayers said, actually often not at 8 Lancaster, they would often be at the house of the family of the deceased person. So he would take a role in taking services, say weekday services, evening services, for those people so that they could say.
And whether the funeral or the services were elsewhere, Rabbi Simon's base at the time he was performing those pastoral functions was
8 Lancaster. Yeah.
And obviously you've referred in your evidence to the concept of tide accommodation, and you've heard me mentioning it in opening. Again, so far as Rabbi Simon was concerned, what does that mean in concrete terms as to the basis on which he was in the property?
Well, he was there because we had a synagogue. We didn't have a synagogue.
And so that I don't have to ask you that question about all his successors, does the same apply to those who came after him?
Indeed, yeah, the two are linked because you have a synagogue, you have a rabbi.
I was asking you about page 209 of the application documents. Over the page, 210 and onwards, there are some membership details. Now, the number of people paying is not totaled up. But if I go through and say how the position seems to me to be, perhaps you can tell me if you think I've miscalculated anything. So the 2004, we got 5,500 of all £100 fees, gift, whatever you describe it as. So say 55,000.
Right.
And then 58 on the same basis for 05. 64 or thereabouts for 06, although there's some slight quirks there. And then 65 for the following year, because you've got a handful of 200s rather than 100s. 71 for the following year. 56 people paying up to 150 the following year. Does that seem about right?
Yes, I believe so.
And then over the page, we've got what's marked as 2009-10, and it actually says at the bottom, total sum received from 72 members. You take that as the figure by there.
Indeed.
And then following page, again, if one adds it up, you get 78 people have contributed towards the figure we see at the bottom.
Yes.
And over the page, I think it's 90 something for 2012-13. Written down the figure. $86. And then 215 to 216, you add up all those families, you get 97.
That sounds about right.
97, did you say?
97, yes, ma'am. Right. Now, Mr. Singer, the inspector asked the question, actually, what is a synagogue? And in terms of the accoutrement that one requires in order to have a synagogue, in addition to a space that's large enough for people, can you assist, please, with what the accoutrement or the decorations are that one requires, and how HWJC provided for them, or didn't, as the case was. And again, focus please on the early years.
Okay, I'll do my best, although I should say there are rabbis here who could give a much more precise biblical definition than I
We
could.
might be here for a few days. Answers to that.
I suppose the basics are an ark in which to hold the scrolls of the Bible, the Sefer Torahs. Above that, we have we call an everlasting light, which is on all the time, which tends to be fixed by the ark. What else is that? There are quite a number of prayer shawls which kept at a synagogue, which people wear during the Sabbath service, for example. With the Sefer Torah, there are various covers and curtains. There are various items of silverware. Most of the scrolls have silver plates on the front of them as a form of decoration, but also describing where they came from and how, if they're in memory of someone, the details of that. It's traditional to have decorations on the top of the Sefer Torah as well, which tend to be silver bells, sometimes in the form of a crown. We have what we call a bimmer, which is a prayer table, which tends to be slightly bigger than you would expect a prayer table to be, because the scrolls have to be rolled out. They're on parchment rather than in book form, so they have to be rolled out onto quite a large table. We have bookcases for quite a large number of books, several hundred books. Covers for decorative covers for some of the tables, a candelabra which we use for a particular festival. We also have commemorative boards we use to show our respect to members of the community who have made a particular contribution in a certain way. I'm sure I've missed some items.
Well, let's just start with that list for now. The general question for you is, did the community have those items listed in the early period, 2002?
We had some, but not all. The problem was that when we were using people's homes, those people had to basically every week vacate their lounge, which was during the week full of furniture and carpets and other accoutrements. So if you're doing that every week, week in, week out, there's only so much you can do to kind of recreate a synagogue. So we had some of the basics, but we didn't have a synagogue.
But in the early years of the community, can you explain to the inspector how those matters were dealt with?
At number 8.
At number 8.
How we... sorry, I'm not sure I understand.
When did you get the ark?
When did we get the ark? We got our first ark. It was made for us by a member of the community. Can I check my notes? Because I do remember that, I'm not sure I put it in here, but I did. It was...
Obviously, if this is wrong, it's wrong. But can you see if you can locate the statement of Joanne Geisler?
Yes.
On the 11th of May, 2015.
It was Joanne Geisler's father who made the ark for us. Let's see if I can find that.
This is a memory
Thank you.
test on minuscule points of detail. If you can have a look at that, remind yourself of what she says.
2003. Yeah. So the ark was, and the bimmer, in fact, were both made by the same person, and donated to the synagogue in 2003.
Does that accord with your recollection? Now you've been reminded of this.
It does. I knew it was in the very early days. I just couldn't remember precisely 2002 or 2003.
Right.
Do you have to have any ceremony of consecration?
You don't have to, but we did. And the building, I believe, was consecrated by, I think it was the chief rabbi who came along to do that. It's not I don't think it's a mandatory thing. We did have one.
That would have been in 2008 at the same time, as a school.
It was about 2003.
Right, have we got any records of that? The only chief rabbi I recollect reading about was the one in 2008. But,
It would have been the same one in 2003.
Probably would have been, yes.
I don't recall seeing anything, but if you can point me to it.
I'm not sure that there was anything put in about it.
No, I think the first time that question's been asked, Adam, is when we got asked it. So the witness has given his best recollection.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay.
Look before the end of the inquiry and see if there's any documents that support that as well. Right. So we covered the Bima and the Ark. In your appendices, and in particular with your chronology, there are various references to books being furnished to the community.
Mm-hmm.
Can you turn that up and just point the inspector to what you're specifically referring to in that regard?
Well, I think that the first mentions are in 1999, where we had, well, actually the first mention goes back to 1991, where we were donated books by the Taylor family. These were shipped around people's homes for services. Then in March 1999, we had some additional books donated. These weren't so much prayer books as copies of the Bible, so that people could follow.
You may just need to explain what 20 Chumash means.
Chumash is the Bible, basically, in both Hebrew and English, so that members of the community use it with the rabbis reading from the scrolls to follow the service. And often there's a commentary in there as well to explain the details. Then, as for various occasions we needed more, so in January 2000 we were loaned, although I think we still have them, 70 prayers from Cockfoster Synagogue.
Again, are those books that will be used for the weekly Saturday service?
They are, those were prayer books.
And then there's another entry on books, November 2002.
Indeed, so there were 42 prayer books given at that time and 20 more copies of the Bible.
And a bit further down the page, June 2004, you have a reference to donation of a scroll.
Yes, until then we were borrowing scrolls. There is an issue on certain festivals. You need more than one scroll. You need either 2 or 3 scrolls. So we were at the point where we had 2, which we'd been loaned, and we didn't have a third. So the opportunity came up. We were approached by the United Synagogue. Would we like a third scroll? Which meant we could perform on certain Sabbaths or festivals. We could perform the festival more accurately.
And just help, the frequency of the occasions when one needs 3 scrolls, how often is that during the year?
I'm testing me in front of me. A handful of occasions. Quite a lot.
Again, this isn't a memory test, but there's some evidence about donation of bookcases.
Mm-hmm.
Can you help on that?
They were donated by the Gold family. Trying to remember when that
Well,
was.
if you find either Mr. or Mrs. Gold's statements, please. And just, they're probably fairly similar, but Mrs. Gold says at that time, I donated bookcases to the synagogue to hold several hundred prayer books that the community had accumulated through loans and donations. Does that evidence reflect your recollection as to the number of prayer books that have been accumulated by this stage?
Yes, they were full.
And what should the inspector infer from having that number of books? What particularly is about?
Well, I guess we didn't have them to show. They're well-used and well-thumbed books. They were there for the community who were attending the services. In fact, I guess if the inspector visits the site, you'll see.
Yeah.
what may help, and again it may help on the visit to the site, is that the books that were donated, often they'd have a sheet in the inside cover confirming who had donated them and when they were donated.
Well, let's see whether any of this is contested by anyone in the course of the inquiry. Now, I just want to leap ahead.
Mr. Cabinet, would this be a convenient point to just stop for 5 minutes for
Yeah, absolutely. If it's convenient for you, Madam,
yeah,
that's fine.
I think. 10 minutes, back again at 11:45, please.
Badgering you with questions every 2 seconds. First of all, the question of a consecration service in the early years attended by the Chief Rabbi. Have you reflected on the correct position there?
I have. It was our own service. The Chief Rabbi wasn't in attendance.
Right. So there was a service, but the Chief Rabbi wasn't there.
I don't remember the details. When we started, we had a celebration that we started. I just don't remember the details.
So it was there. And that would have been 2002, 2003.
Yes.
I think that was a leading question.
I'm sorry, probably did slip out. Now, the other matter was in relation to marquees and high holiday services. What's the position there, please?
Yes. I was reminded that there was 1 year, I'm not sure which year, I've asked someone if they can check and get some evidence where we did have a marquee for a high holy day. Right, we'll find out what year that was.
Okay. Now, the council has made reference to a visit by Mr. Pemberton on the 2nd of February 2007. And I just wanted to ask you certain points about that, please. There's a document related to that. I'm sure there will be many additional documents. I've given Mr. Grant a copy, which once Mr. Newton's evidence was available, I think you located this. What does this show, Mr. Singer? Why have you brought this along?
The reason I brought this along was because it had been mentioned that the synagogue was empty of some of its religious accoutrements when the enforcement officer turned up on, I think it was the 2nd of February. I thought this may be a useful way to explain why that was. As I said earlier, for larger events, we tended not to use 8 Lancaster, we tended to use the local primary school or marquees. In this case, it was bat mitzvah, a girl's coming of age, and the family were inviting a larger number of people. So this service took place at the local primary school in Hadley Wood. What that meant, unfortunately, if you move the synagogue, you have to move all the accoutrements. You have to have an ark, you have to have a bimah, you have to have the scrolls. And all of those had to be taken to the school for that event.
So, bimah moved, ark moved, books?
Yes. I don't remember the detail of how many books, but we would have taken some of the books, if not all of them. We would have taken, if it was a large number, we would have taken some of the chairs, but probably not all of them.
What happens to the light?
The light,
Does that go out?
it does for a short period of
not there.
time. It does. It travels with the arc. So it would have gone out for a period of time and then relit again.
dated this 3rd of February. Saturday.
That was, yes, that was the Saturday.
Now, there's a suggestion that either Mr. Pemberton or somebody else, it's not entirely clear, may have been told that 8 Lancaster was only used for 12 elderly worshippers.
To my knowledge, that's not the case. I can't imagine that anyone would say that, more than bearing in mind the numbers of members and attendees we have.
Some suggestion from the papers that figure of 12, if it was mentioned by anyone, may have been mentioned by Councillor Zinkin. Tell us about Councillor Zinkin, please, and the extent to which she has authority to speak for HWJC.
She's not someone I know. I believe she's attended the synagogue on maybe 1 or 2 occasions over the last 10 or 12 years. She's not a member of the community.
So not a member. Has she ever been a director?
No, she's not had any involvement in the community.
There's a point that the council makes about payment of council tax. What do you say about that?
I believe we pay council tax in error, and I believe we've notified the council that that's the case.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Singer. If you just wait there, there'll be some questions for you from Mr. Brown.
Thank you. Morning, Mr. Singer. Can we start, please, with the period before the purchase of 8 Lancaster Avenue, just by way of background? And so far as the local Jewish community, there was and is a synagogue in Cockfosters, or Cockfosters area, is that correct?
Yes.
And at the time when services or meetings were being held at Mr. and Mrs. Pack's home, the principal reason for meeting there was because of the walking distance to the Cockfosters synagogue.
Yes, on the Sabbath, on the Saturday,
Yes.
it's not permitted for people to drive.
And pausing there, so far as Mr. Pick is concerned, he's a planning consultant instructed by the company.
Well, he's been instructed by the synagogue, yes.
By the synagogue. When you say by the synagogue, do you mean the United Synagogue, or what do you mean?
By the Hadleywood Jewish community.
And that is the appellant in this case is the limited company that is that community, isn't it?
I'm sorry, I don't know.
We'll come back to that. So far as Mr. Pick is concerned, he is somebody, isn't he, then, who takes his instructions from the community.
Yes.
And the information that he, over the course of time, has relayed both to the local authority and during the appeal process, is information that he's been provided by the community.
Yes, in most cases.
And so far as Mr. Pick's principal points of contact within the community, would that be you?
I guess I've managed a lot of the process, yes, but there have been lots of people involved, particularly people who have have been involved since the very early days, who have helped to put together the pack of evidence.
Yes. And in your management role of that process, documentation written and submitted by Mr. Pick is documentation that you would look at and read and check before it's submitted?
No, I can't say that I've looked at and read and checked every piece of paper that was submitted to him, I'm afraid.
You haven't read his evidence?
Not all of it, no.
You haven't read all of his evidence? Have you read his proof of evidence?
Yes, I have.
Have you read his appendices?
So which one is the...
A file of the documents that he produces?
This large document here, that's what the appendices.
Have you read those?
No, I can't say that I've read every page of it.
All right.
Sorry.
When a planning application was submitted in 2013, Mr. Pick, I think, acting as agent, was he for that application, or was that somebody else?
No, that was Mr. Pick.
That was Mr. Pick.
I don't think that's right.
2013.
Do you remember the document? Do you remember when the planning application was submitted? A document called a design and access statement. Do you remember that? We'll have a look at it in a minute.
Yeah, could you just remind me where it is in the...
Have a look in Mr. Newton's appendices. Do you have that in front of you?
I do, yes.
I hope yours is tabulated, is it?
It is, it's got appendix numbers on it.
So if you can go, please, to Appendix 3.
Mm-hmm.
Appendix 3 produces the 2013 application. If you move forward within the appendix,
Mm-hmm.
You come to a document called Design and Access Statement. If you let me know when you're there.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, hang on, I'm just flicking through. Design access statement, yes.
Yes.
Oh, I see, this was put in by the architects who were working on the plans at the time, and not by Mr. Pick.
Yeah. Okay. And what was the name of the architect?
Hang on a sec, it's written in this. AOI, LLP. I
And
think it stands for Association of Ideas.
so far as they're concerned, again, who was the community's principal contact with the architects?
Well, there were several people involved, but I was one of them.
Yes. And again, so far as this document is concerned, the Design and Access Statement, have you ever seen that before?
Yes, I have.
Yes. And it includes, for example, doesn't it, information about the history of the Hadleywood Jewish community.
Uh-huh.
And so far as that information, that information in terms of history is information which would have come from you or from other members who had input into the process.
I believe so, yes.
And I don't think there's anything controversial here, Mr. Singer. But look, turn forward to paragraph 3.1.
Mm-hmm.
Line 4. This is the history of a community. Over the years, it's become difficult for members of Hadleywood, particularly the young and the elderly, to walk to Old Farm Avenue on Saturdays and festivals. This is how the local community of Hadleywood has evolved. Yes.
Yes.
Pausing there, in 2007, February, there was a site visit, wasn't there, by a planning enforcement officer to 8 Lancaster Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a site visit that I think was made on notice, wasn't it? In other words, a time and date was arranged.
It's not something I was involved in, so
You don't know.
can't really answer questions in detail.
And a gentleman who met the officer there was called Sandy Lester. You're aware of that, aren't you?
He's a member of our community.
And Sandy Lester, just so that we can place him within the community, he is somebody who was present, I think, almost always during the course of meetings in the early 2000s when you were discussing buying the building.
Yes, he was.
And he was a member of the community from the outset.
Yes.
And again, in your list of paid-up members, he, again, from the time when those lists began in 2003, he was one of the paid-up members. Yes. And so far as Mr. Lester is concerned, in the papers that were submitted as part of the application, and I don't think we need to go to them, but there were a significant number, weren't there, of invoices from contractors and gas engineers and carpet fitters and so on. Yes. And often, but probably not always, but often the person who seemed to be dealing with that side of things was Mr. Lester.
In the early days, yes.
And he was somebody, we've seen his statutory declaration, as would you, somebody who would have attended the services in the early days of 8 Lancaster Avenue. Yes. And you told us that you were there, so you would have seen him there, wouldn't you?
Mm-hmm.
And so far as what he told Mr. Pemberton at the site visit in February 2007, you weren't there, so you can't comment on what he did or didn't tell him.
No, not really.
Good. In terms of the purchase of 8 Lancaster Avenue, and that was part of a process, as you've outlined, which had been going on for some time, hadn't it? A process of identifying a building.
Indeed.
And produced in I think, your appendices are a number of minutes from meetings which have taken place in the years leading up to the purchase.
Mm-hmm.
They start at page 47 of your appendices. Now they refer to the Hadleywood Minion. Again, in simple terms, was that that name, was that the predecessor really for the HWJA?
I guess it was a slang term we gave the community in the early days.
And a series of minutes prepared described as meetings of the Board of Management. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so far as these minutes are concerned, can I just ask in general terms about those, first of all? Was there anybody whose specific responsibility it was to take those minutes?
No, it tended to get passed. It tended to get passed around from person to
So
person.
there wasn't somebody who was the secretary whose role it was to take minutes?
No, I'm afraid not. We weren't that formal.
So somebody would take minutes of each meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And presumably, once the minutes have been taken, would they be circulated amongst the members of the community, or would they be circulated amongst a smaller group? How would that work?
Depended on the meeting, but in most cases they were circulated amongst the attendees of the meeting. Yeah.
And were they then presumably stored in a file, were they, of minutes?
Having tried to pull together all the evidence for this, I wish that were the case, but No, we were, fortunately, we were a little bit more haphazard with them.
But having been circulated amongst a number of individuals, there would have been, wouldn't there, a number of copies floating around of each set of minutes.
Yes.
And in terms of the taking of minutes, is that a process that continued up until the point that you had purchased 8 Lancaster Avenue?
On and off.
Yeah.
We formalised it when we became, when we got Lancaster Avenue, we became a charity, and it had to be more formal. Until then, it was, should we say, a little bit more of an amateur effort. It didn't happen all the time.
No, but you acknowledged, didn't you, as a group, the importance of having records of what it was you were discussing?
Sure we did.
What's the purpose of the minutes?
To keep records of what we were discussing.
Yes. Turn to page 47 then. And we start here, don't we, with the minutes of a meeting on the 13th of February 2000. Again, if you give me the nod, and then I know you're...
Yeah, sorry, yes, yes.
And we can see there who's present. We don't need a moment to go through that. But if you turn down to the item which is numbered as item number 3, we see there the reference to a building and discussions about possible sites at that stage.
Yes.
And then if we can move forward from there, please, page 49. 12th of March. Again, we can go straight down to number 4, which is a section headed building. See that?
Yes, yes.
And discussions there again about potential sites.
Mm-hmm.
And we can follow through then chronologically, please, to page 51. Again, building, we see Sandy, let's presume Sandy Lester with some input from him into the process.
Mm-hmm.
And discussions about a particular house. Forward, page 52, June 2000.
Mm-hmm.
And now at number 5 for that meeting, that's over the page, top of page 53. Prolonged discussions about a future building, and again, reference to Stephen Kay, who must be Stephen Kenton, Sandy Lester, and Ronnie, who would that be?
Ronald Brown.
Ronald Brown, reference to a visit to a house by them.
Mm-hmm.
September 2000, here we have the minutes with unnumbered paragraphs, but if you look halfway down the page, reference there to Sandy Lester contacting the owners of a particular site, potential site. Yes?
Yes.
Page 55, we're nearly at the end of this set of records. The 3rd of December, it doesn't say 3rd of December 2000, but we can work out from the rest of the context of the document that it's 2000.
Mm-hmm.
And again, in the paragraph under the heading property, discussions about approaches to various agents. Yes?
Yes.
We'll come back to that specifically in a moment. And if you look at the bottom of that page, some dates, diary dates, future meetings refer to 17th of February, 7th of April and the 5th of May, all presumably 2001. Yes. And as we have seen, haven't we, from these previous minutes, no doubt at those future meetings in 2001, the acquisition of a building would have continued to be an item on the agenda.
Yes.
And as matters moved from 2001 into 2002, at some stage 8 Lancaster Avenue would have been identified at the meeting. Yes?
Yes.
discussions, much in the vein that we've seen in these previous minutes. Somebody would have gone to see the property and report back to the rest of you about it.
It's actually not quite the way it worked.
How did it work?
Because of the timing, a small number of individuals said that there was an opportunity here for us to purchase this building as a synagogue, but the process of going through the community to make it all happen would have taken too long. So I'm doing this from memory. I may need to check some stuff, but so those members went ahead and bought the building on behalf of the community. So it kind of started off slightly outside the process and then came back into the process, if that makes sense.
Yeah. There must have been a meeting about it before the acquisition at the end of July.
I'm sure there were meetings amongst that small group of people,
Yes, that's
and
what I
they made a decision to go ahead. I wasn't at those meetings.
And throughout 2001 and into 2002, even before Lancaster Avenue had been identified, you told us would have been continuing discussions about the building.
It peaked and troughed over the years, but yes.
Continuing discussions presumably about the funding as well.
Yes.
If you go please forward to page 57, we see, don't we, there minutes of a meeting in November 2003.
Mm-hmm.
See that?
I do.
These minutes were produced by you in your appendices. Yes.
Yes.
And in putting together these documents for your appendices, is that something that you carried out on your own or with the advice of Mr. Pick, or how did it work?
I trawled through lots of scraps to try and put together as much as I could. I believe I put them together myself. I don't think specific advice on.
You'd be pretty careful about it, wouldn't you?
Careful in what sense?
What happened? Where are the minutes for the meetings in 2001 and 2002?
I see what you're getting at. They were just ones I couldn't track down at the time.
But you've told us already, haven't you, that for each set of minutes there would have been a number of copies in circulation, because it got circulated amongst relevant people.
And I did go around, and I needed, as I said, our processes were somewhat informal at that time, so I did go around previous members to pull together minutes.
So you went round, and how many people would you have asked, roughly?
6, 7, 8 people.
6, 7, 8. And of the 6, 7, 8 people you asked, you were able between you to produce the minutes of every meeting throughout the period of 2000. Yes. But none for 2001 or 2002. Is that right?
Obviously not.
So everybody told you that you asked for 2001 minutes and 2002 minutes, but they didn't have a copy.
Yes.
And whoever prepared the minutes for each of those meetings during each of those years, whoever prepared the minutes no longer had a copy either, whether on their computer or in hard copy.
We're talking about 12 and 13 years ago. Most people wouldn't have the same computer as they had 12 or 13 years ago.
I said that we'd come back to page 55. Now, Mr. Leaving that open, Mr. Pack has submitted to the inquiry a statutory declaration in which he sets out what the brief was to the agents, in particular Staffens. Yes, and you would have read that, wouldn't you, this declaration?
Yes, I think I have.
And do you want to turn it up in front of you so that
Yes,
you're
sure.
confident in what you're saying?
I have it.
Yes, and Mr. Pack, again to give it its context, heavily involved in the community. Yes?
Yes.
Present at all the, certainly most or all of the meetings that we've just gone through. Yes?
Well, where he was put down as in attendance, yes.
And if we turn, please, to the first page of his declaration, the fourth paragraph, it's unnumbered paragraphs, but the fourth paragraph, which begins by 2002. See that?
Yes.
Fourth line, the local estate agent Staffens was instructed to look for properties with a very large reception area that could be used as synagogue. See that? Put that to one side and turn, please, to the minutes from the 3rd of December 2000. Yes?
Mm-hmm.
And the paragraph numbered 1 property. Yes?
Yes.
About halfway down the paragraph, it was agreed that a more proactive approach be made to other agents in the area. This to be a brief that the need is just to acquire a property for a relative. See that?
Yes.
And then reference below to continuing discussions with Staffens.
Mm-hmm.
And all I'd like, please, your clarification about in this respect is, which is correct, was the brief to the agents to look for a property that could be used as a synagogue, or was the brief to the agents to look for a property that was for a relative?
The brief to the agents was to look for a property which was for a relative. Would you like me to explain the reasoning
Yeah,
behind
we'll
that?
come to that in a minute. So far as your website is concerned, say I mean can we call it the association for or community, we'll call it to make that easier.
Synagogue?
So far as the community is concerned, when did the website become operational? Well, can you remember who was the rabbi living at Lancaster Avenue at the time that the website was up and running? Does that help you to give us a time frame?
Without some kind of reference, because I haven't got a clue.
Who was responsible within the community for running the website?
Currently, it's a gentleman called Lawrence Slavin.
And how long's he been doing it for?
Again, without checking back records, I find it really difficult to give you a date on that.
Well, who did it before Mr. Slavin? Well, has he been doing it for weeks or months or years?
No, he's been
or
doing it for quite some time.
years?
Certainly more than a year.
And how does it work? Does he, as the person in charge of the website, does he circulate amongst others documents on there before they become published on the website?
No, not normally.
Well, for instance, there's a history page, isn't there, on the website that we've all seen in papers. So if I was a history page, who was responsible for writing that?
I can't say 100%, but he would have been involved in it, either putting together the details or editing it.
Can you turn up, please, Mr. Newton's appendices? In particular, please, tab or appendix 9. And within tab 9, there are two sub-appendices, 9A and 9B. You see that?
Yes.
And 9A is the document headed Our History, taken from the website, yes,
Yes.
and downloaded or printed on the 6th of January 2014, we see from the front sheet. And we then turn to the document itself, Our History, which begins by telling us that the community started more than 17 years ago. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
And as we follow down the first page, we come then, don't we, to the purchase of Lancaster Avenue in the 4th paragraph, about 2/3 of the way down the page. Again, let me know when you found it. The paragraph begins, the idea of a permanent home and property.
Yeah.
And then in that paragraph, the history refers to the purchase of the house itself.
Yes.
And then in the following paragraph, that's the final paragraph on the page.
I think you've got a different page from us, Mr. Grant. I've got a photograph on mine, so the idea of a permanent home is actually right at the very bottom of
I
the...
think that you're possibly looking at 9B.
No, sorry. 9A. Our History.
Yeah, there should be. Maybe you might have been the wrong way around.
I've got the idea of a permanent home and property in Hadley Wood.
Have you got a 9B?
Yes.
And is your 9B the document that doesn't have a photograph on it?
Yep.
I see. Can we go please then, I'm sorry, I've got mine the wrong way around. Can you go to 9B?
That's May 2015, according to the document I have. The actual document doesn't have a date on, it's just the front sheet. Ah.
Yeah, mine.
Sorry,
The other way around.
the one with the photograph on the second page, which has got marked, where it does say copyright 2015.
Yes. That's why mine.
But it's got appendix 9A on the bottom. And on the front.
The one with the photograph on.
Yeah.
Is the document printed off in 2015.
Well, the front sheet's wrong then.
It's the front sheet then.
I've got a document here that says 9A, January 2014.
Yeah, well, we can see from the end of the document that that's the 2015 one.
Right, so we're looking at the one with the photograph on, which is 2015.
So, no, we're looking at the other one, which is the 2014 one, which is
Right.
the one without the photograph.
Which is 9B in my bundle.
Yeah. So that is the document which was printed in January 2014.
That's 14.
Correct in my bundle, but somehow got the other way around.
Are you with us, Mr.
I
Singh?
think so, yes. I've got two documents here.
Yeah, so
The
then...
one without the photograph,
I've got that.
which should be the 2014 document. Yes?
Yeah, there is
Can't see any date on
there
it.
is no date printed on it.
No, but we'll get evidence in due course.
Yeah, I'm not sure that anything turns on that, does it? Mr. Taberner?
I'd be astonished if it did.
Right, yeah, okay.
So have a look. Let's again go to the fourth paragraph, document without the photograph, 2014 document. Paragraph begins, the idea of a permanent home and property. See that?
Yes, I can.
Following paragraph begins, once we had the house, for financial reasons, we also needed a tenant. See that?
Yeah.
And then it talks about Rabbi Hillel and Yael Simons together with their children moving in.
Yes.
Yeah. Now move forward to the 2015 document, the one with the photograph on. Also headed out history. Yes? If you go to the bottom of the first page, you'll see the paragraph which begins the idea of a permanent home and property. How you would. Yes?
Yeah.
Now go to the next paragraph.
Yes.
Begins, Rabbi Hillel and Yael Simons, together with their 6 children, moved in.
Yes.
See that?
Yes.
So at some stage between 2014 and 2015, the sentence, once we had the house for financial reasons, we also needed a tenant, has been deleted, hasn't it?
I'd have to take your word for that.
Do you know why it's been deleted?
No idea.
But it's Mr. Slavin who would have been responsible by 2015 for this website.
Or HWJC, yes, he would have been, yes.
Turn please to the copies of accounts which have been produced in Mr. Pick's appendices. We're going to come back in due course again to those history papers. Mr. Pick's appendices. And the information from the accounts begin at page 36.
So are we looking at the fifth document that starts with
If you look at in Mr. Pick's appendices, the pagination in the bottom right-hand corner.
Sorry. Okay, got it.
Okay.
36.
Page 36, bottom right hand corner.
Thank you.
Director's report, period ended 30th of June 2003.
Yes.
Yes.
So what we have here is a succession of extracts from the director's reports submitted, filed as part of the company's annual accounts. Correct?
Correct.
And we know, I think from your evidence already, but we've seen it elsewhere, that Mr. Fell is described as being the financial representative of the company, so presumably he plays a role, does he, in the preparation of the accounts?
Yes, he does.
And so far as directors' reports are concerned, those would be signed off by the relevant directors.
Yes.
And would you be one of those?
I'm one of the directors, yes.
So how long have you been a director?
Since the beginning, since 2002.
So, June 2003, we can see, can't we, page 36 this is, paragraph numbered 3 under the heading Activities and Developments during the period.
Yes.
During the period under review, a suitable property was purchased which has been leased to a rabbi and his family, who are assisting in promoting the advancement of Judaism in Hadley Wood.
Yes.
Yes. So the reference there is to a leasing arrangement, isn't it?
Yes.
Page 37, year ended June 2004. activities and developments during the period. During the period under review, the property which has been let to a rabbi and his family has continued to be used in promoting the advancement of Judaism in Hadley Wood. So once again, references to a leasing arrangement. Yes, yes. 2005, the corresponding paragraph, activities and developments during the year. Again, reference there to the property being let to a rabbi and his family.
Mm-hmm.
Now, keep those open, please, because we'll come back to them in a second. So far as Rabbi Simons is concerned, he tells us through his statutory declaration that he left in September 2005.
Yes.
Yes, you don't disagree with that, presumably.
I must admit, without checking, I can't remember the exact date, but it would have been there or thereabouts.
Yes. And we know, don't we, from other documentation, council tax records and so on, that so far as Rabbi Wanderer is concerned, he moved in on the 18th of October 2006.
Yes.
And again, in the council tax records, we'll go to them if you want us to, but I'm sure you'll have read them. That so far as council tax is concerned, during that period after Rabbi Simons and before the arrival of Rabbi Wanderer, property is referred to as being empty and undergoing refurbishment.
I believe so, yes.
Go back to where we were in the accounts. Page 38, 2005. Over the page, please, to page 39. 2007. Yes?
Yes.
Where's 2006?
I believe it was missed out, if I can say this, but council picked that up a few days ago and I gave them a copy.
It's also missed out from Mr. Newton replicating exactly this material, which is the exhibit to the PCN response.
Well, it was provided as part of the PCN response, was it? Is that what we've been told?
Yeah, that's absolutely right, and Mr. Newton has done the same thing. It's all publicly available material. Somewhere I've got a copy of the 2006 accounts.
Oh, I'd be very grateful if I could show me it, please.
Yeah, Appendix 5 of Mr. Newton's.
Yeah, again there, 2005, and then there's nothing until 2007.
Well, had the question been asked before this morning, it would have been provided already, or you could have done a company search. But I'll see if I can show it to you during the break.
All right, thank you. Had you been aware before it was raised with you that 2006 hadn't been copied within the documentation or not?
No, not until either yesterday or the day before when I provided a copy.
So you've provided a copy to Mr.
Yes, I have.
So you've got a copy then?
Well, I don't. I've
Mr.
certainly.
Singer's just said he's provided you with a copy.
He has provided me by email a I'm not sure whether I printed it out, because I'm not sure if it takes anything further from either side's perspective, but it was certainly
But I
intended.
think Mr. Grant could have a look at it.
That's what I've said.
Yeah.
I'll show him
Thank you.
if I can retrieve it on my phone.
I have my laptop with me, and I'll have a copy of the email I sent with the copy on. So if you can't, as long as I can get it printed out somewhere, I can show you on the screen.
Thank you very much. If you turn to Mr. Newton's Appendix 7, please. At the very back, or almost at the very back of Appendix 7, we can see your declaration dated March 2014. I'm sorry, they're not paginated, so it's... Bottom right-hand corner says 7-62. That helps.
7-62. Yes, I have it.
And on the first page of the declaration, let's go to paragraph 4, that begins, since the community began. You got that?
Yes.
Since the community began, we have had resident rabbis to lead the congregation and to provide religious instruction. He then described Rabbi Simons and go on to describe his successors, Rabbi Wanderer and Rabbi Birnbaum. Yes?
Yes.
And then in the following paragraph, during the times that no rabbi was employed, the residential accommodation on the first floor was accompanied at weekends by visiting clergy who assisted in the running of services. Yes. So for the period between Rabbi Simon leaving in 2005 and Rabbi Wanderer's arrival towards the end of 2006, you were relying during that period, were you, on visiting clergy?
It was a mix of visiting clergy and lay members. Services between.
Well, are you able to say how often you have visiting clergy during that period or not?
It wasn't that often because we were doing some refurbishment work on the house. So it was basically from time to time when there wasn't a lay member available. The particular issue is the reading of the scrolls. That's quite a specialist skill, and there are very few non-rabbis who have that ability. So when we had a member available in the community, we would use them. If we did it, we would ask someone else.
So who in the community can do it?
At the time, had one main person who was capable of it, a gentleman called Ali Carmeli.
And in that period, 2005 to 2006, were the Saturday morning services continuing on a weekly basis at Lancaster Avenue?
Yes, sir.
So continuing during that period, usually taken by Mr. Carmeli, is that correct?
Well, a mix of people in the community. He was one of the people who did the reading from the scrolls, which is a particularly difficult thing to do. But there were, it tended to get split up amongst several people,
So
as most services do.
usually taken by, should we call them lay people in the community, is that fair?
A mix of lay people and more rabbinical people.
Or some more rabbinical people?
Well, that's, I use that to, I guess, is to paraphrase being able to, what we call lay and read from the scrolls. See, the scrolls have the letters on them, but they have no vowels or notes, and they tend to be sung, so you have to be particularly skilled in it to be able to read from those documents.
And so far as the visiting rabbi is concerned, I'm sorry to press you on it, but
No,
would
that's
it
okay.
be helpful? You say not that often. What does that mean? Once a month, once a quarter? What are we talking about?
I would guess once a month.
So if we go back to your statutory declaration in March 2014, one we're looking at a moment ago, where you say during the times that no rabbi was employed, the residential accommodation on the first floor was occupied at weekends by visiting clergy.
Mm-hmm.
The more accurate version of that would be to insert the word occasionally, wouldn't it, within that sentence?
This is a matter of interpretation.
Well, once a month, you reckon?
I don't have those facts available. I'm making a guess, but I think it would be then. Particularly so, as I said earlier, because we were having renovation and decoration work done to the rabbis.
So far as those Saturday services are concerned, Saturday morning services, in the early days, in terms of attendances, presumably there's no attendance book on site for services, is there?
Right, not no.
So,
One of the things you can't do on the Sabbath is write, so you wouldn't do it.
yeah. So, in terms of who was attending, at times when you would attend a Saturday morning service, for instance, would you be accompanied by Mrs. Singer?
No, my wife wasn't attending.
And what about your children?
They were regular attendees in the early years, not in the later years.
How many children do you have?
2.
And you described it in really broad terms during the course of the morning, the involvement of families within the community. So far as others who would have been attending at that time, again, did most people come as a couple, or was it more usual to have one or the other?
We're a very mixed community. We have people who come on their own, we have lots of people who come with their wives, we have lots of people who come with their children.
Yeah, your children wouldn't have been the only children there then, no?
No.
And you told us during your evidence in chief, in answer to questions that is from Mr. Tabachnik, about services that, or dinners that took place on Friday nights in the early years.
Yes.
In your statutory declarations or statements, is that something you've ever spoken about before? You've read through all the other statutory declarations and statements, haven't you, submitted on behalf of your parent?
I can't say I've read them all.
No, well, in the ones you have read, have you seen anybody else talk about Friday nights at Lancaster Avenue in those early days?
I'm not sure without reading through them again, sorry.
Have a look in your appendices, please.
Mm-hmm.
Page 27. At 26. This is a newsletter for the Hadleywood Jewish community called The Community. See that?
Yes.
Dated September 2004.
Yes.
And again, just to put it into some sort of context if we can, of those that have been provided, the most recent one before that we see, the previous page is in 2000. Yes?
No. That's a different newsletter from a different organisation.
All right. In terms of other newsletters then from this organisation, are there any others before September 2004 that the inquiry has been shown?
No, I think that's why it says the first of what we hope to be.
So September 2004, and if you turn to page 2, we see, again, 2/3 of the way down the page, under the subheading Shore Services, Times and Places. See that?
Yes.
A reference, first of all, to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur services being held at the primary school.
Yes.
And then a reference to Shabbat services held every Saturday morning at Lancaster Avenue.
Indeed, yeah.
You turn over the page, page 28, bottom right-hand corner, dates for your diary.
Mm-hmm.
And a reference to a mother and baby and toddler group, and to a fundraising dinner dance.
Mm-hmm.
And then the final page, at least the final page that we have copied, is page 29.
Mm-hmm.
Over the page. Yes.
Yes.
Any reference in this newsletter, September 2004, to Friday night gatherings at Lancaster Avenue?
No.
Turn forward to page 34 of the appendices. Now, you in telling us earlier about the Friday night gatherings, you referred to them as an oneg, didn't you?
I did.
Page 34, this is the March 2005 newsletter.
Mm-hmm.
Tickets on sale for the oneg, yes?
Yes.
This year's oneg Shabbat has been confirmed for Friday the 8th of April. Tickets are on sale. Yeah. Is there any difference between that type of oneg and the oneg that you were referring to earlier?
I suppose you could say there are differences in scale, because there were often Friday nights where the rabbi and his wife would invite a group of members of the community around to share their Friday night dinner with them.
So it was Friday night with the rabbi and his family. That's an oneg, is it?
A smaller one, but yes.
Yes. So when you were referring earlier to Friday evenings, that's the scale that you were really referring to, whereas what we see on page 34, the annual oneg, is a different scale, isn't it?
Well, we've been doing both. So I think what you're asking is, where's the reference to earlier ones? Is that correct?
Well, I'm asking you whether this oneg, referred to in March 2005, is the same or of a different scale to the onegs that you were referring to earlier on.
I bundled the two together. I didn't give it any kind of...
Right. So you bundle them together, although one of them is the rabbi inviting people to his house for dinner on Friday, and the other is an all-ticket event annually in April.
It is a Friday night meal.
Okay. You were asked about consecration, do you remember?
Yes.
And you told us it's a big event to have a consecration. Your
I
words.
said we had a celebration, and as I mentioned earlier, I made a mistake in terms of who was there.
Yeah. A visit by the chief rabbi is a big deal, isn't it?
Yes, and I mixed it up. It didn't happen until later.
So we know the chief rabbi came in 2008 to unveil the new scroll. Were there any other occasions he visited?
If I refer just to the history,
Yeah.
No, not to my recollection.
No. A visit by the chief rabbi to, on any view, a relatively small community would be a big event, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Yes? And when you were asked about consecration, and you said that that was an event in 2003 where the chief rabbi was present, that was just a mistake, was it?
It was.
And you must have had in your mind then, mustn't you, the 2008 visit by the chief rabbi?
Didn't have anything in my mind.
It was just another visit, was it?
It was a mistake.
That didn't happen. So far as Rabbi Simon is concerned, I'd like us to go through briefly, if we can, Rabbi Simon, then Rabbi Wonder, then Rabbi Bernbach. So far as Rabbi Simon's period is concerned, we've seen from the papers, haven't we, that he was introduced to the community as a rabbi who had been living in Bristol but was wanting to return to the London area.
Yes.
And when he came to live at Lancaster Avenue, there was him, his wife, 6 children. I've taken that from the art history page.
Okay, I can't remember off the top of my head how many children he had, but yes.
And it is described by Rabbi Fine, who's provided the statutory declaration, as being employed as Rabbi Fine's assistant rabbi.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Rabbi Fine was at that time, was he Rabbi at Cockfosters at the time?
He was, yes.
So he was the rabbi at Cockfosters. Rabbi Simon arrives as his assistant rabbi.
Mm-hmm.
Lives at 8 Lancaster Avenue. Yes. As Rabbi Fine's assistant rabbi, who was his employer? Was it the community, or was it the Cockfosters Synagogue, or was it the United Synagogue?
Question, I'm not sure. I mean, I know his duties were solely towards the Hadley Wood Synagogue.
What duties did he perform, so far as you know, as Rabbi Fine's assistant rabbi?
Well, bear in mind, Rabbi Fine, we were in effect a satellite community. So Rabbi Fine, as well as founding us and supporting us, was, I suppose, responsible for his overall Kehillah, bigger community. Obviously, he had his own services to run. He couldn't be in 2 places at one time. It would have been a long trek to do on a regular basis. So it would have been impossible for him to look after this part of the community on a regular basis.
Are you talking about the long trek? How far is it, do you know, from Lancaster Avenue to the Cockfosters Synagogue?
The walk is, I believe it's over an hour.
How many miles is it? Do you know?
50 minutes to walk it.
How many miles is it, do you know?
It's 50 minutes to walk it. 2.6.
So far as...
but also bear in mind, sorry, Rabbi Fine also had his own community, quite
yes.
a large one to cater for.
And so far as Rabbi Simons is concerned, he wasn't being paid a salary.
No, what we did was we gave him a subsidised rental. Basically, he paid a much lower rent than the going rate in return for providing services to the community.
So he was,
And there'll be financial records of that.
yeah, he was paying rent to the community.
Yes.
But no contract of employment. No.
No, I don't think so.
And if you can turn back, please, in Mr. Newton's appendices to Appendix 9, the Our History document.
Yes.
The 2014 version, this is the version without photograph.
Without photograph, yes.
Paragraph at the bottom of the page, the one that begins once we had the house for financial reasons.
Mm-hmm.
The fifth line of that paragraph, by 2007, we were able to appoint a part-time rabbi.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. What was the distinction then between the terms on which Rabbi Wanderer was employed and the terms on which Rabbi Simons was employed?
I'm not sure the legal differences, but basically at the time we were very fortunate with Rabbi Simon in that he was willing to provide the services for a subsidised rent. When we looked for his replacement, when he moved on, we weren't able to find anyone who was willing to take on the role on those terms.
Yes. So when Rabbi Wanderer arrived, he was considered a more formal appointment as a part-time rabbi, was he?
Yes, yes.
And so far as Rabbi Wanderer's period at the helm, that period saw growth in the community, didn't it?
I think we went through the numbers earlier,
Yeah,
so
numbers
it,
going up.
it was in line with those numbers, yes.
As membership numbers go up, so attendance numbers go up.
Partly, yes.
And if we turn, please, to Rabbi Wanderer's declaration again, so that, to be fair to you, you've got it in front of you. It's again Mr. Newton's appendix. So sorry, and there are two versions. Let me just check which one I need to turn to. Sorry, I'm going to ask you to turn to the just a minute. Yeah, the accounts, please. In Mr. Pick's appendices, page 39.
Yes.
And this is the year ended June 2007, paragraph headed Achievements and Performance.
Mm-hmm.
And we can see there, can't we, in the first line, whereas previously the reference had been to leasing arrangements for rabbi. Here we now see, during the year under review, this is the year that coincides with Rabbi Wanderer's arrival, isn't it? Mr. Singer?
Yes, yes.
A new rabbi and his family have taken up residence. See that?
Yes.
So no reference now in 2007 to leasing or letting to rabbi. Yes?
Yes.
And again, so that we can see that it's not a one-off use of words. If we I don't think in the following 2008 or 2009 any reference anymore to rabbis leasing or letting the premises.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Under Rabbi Wanderer, was there a change under him in terms of the number of services for festivals that were held at Lancaster Avenue?
I'm not sure, to be honest.
Go back to the history pages, please, at Mr. Newton's Appendix 9.
Mm-hmm.
And the 2014 version of that photograph.
Yes.
Second page, top of the page. With Rabbi Wanderer's help, our community continued to grow, enabling us to have services for all the festivals and create regular minyanim.
Mm-hmm.
Now, first of all, reference there to services for all the festivals at Lancaster Avenue. So again, having reminded yourself on that, can I ask you again, did the number of services for festivals increase under Rabbi Wanderer?
If they did, I don't think it would have been by that much, because we were doing most of the minor festivals. So yeah, I'll say yes, but I don't think it was a significant difference.
And so far as a reference to regular minyanim, could you tell us what does minyanim mean?
It's a gathering of people to say prayers together. I'm sure there's a more formal definition than that.
Madam, it's 1:05.
Yes.
That's good.
Yeah, I'm not holding you to it, Mr. Grant, but how much longer do you think it might be? Just so that Mr. Haynes and Ms. Stockwell have some idea.
I hope less than half an hour, if that helps.
Ms. Stockwell, that might be pushing it a bit for, because I don't want to hurry, and after Mr. Grant, and you said you had to leave at 3?
We're going to, yes, I wasn't able to reschedule it, but
No.
we can come tomorrow morning, if that would be convenient.
I'm thinking for your convenience, really. I'm just thinking we might not be...
Well, unless, Madam, if it was... unless Mrs. Stockwell was interjected after the lunch journal, you heard from her, and then we continue with...
Yeah, I don't...
Well, I don't mind doing that because it may assist discussions as to how many witnesses I need to
If you-
come thereafter.
If you don't mind being broken up in cross that would mean, Mr. that you can't talk
half an hour.
to members of your team, because you're now in the middle of cross-examination. Okay. You can talk about the weather, but not about the weather. But it would probably be better if she went off on your own for
Madam, can I suggest that we have Mr. Haynes as well at the same?
Yes, I was going to, yes, but we'll have both
But
interested persons after
I'm
that.
happy all day.
Well, yeah.
I'm happy if you want to continue. Or
Well, no, if we're going to have a break, I think, if Ms. Haynes, if you're happy, we'll have third parties after interested parties after lunch.
Sure.
Okay. Now, how long do people want for lunch? I'd like you may want to
I'm saying
check.
here, so it doesn't, for me, it doesn't matter if you are
Sure.
sure.
I think today maybe we can have till 2 o'clock.
2 o'clock. Okay, that's fine. Quite happy with that. Right. So back here at 2 o'clock, then, please.